They raised him to crush his own people, taken as a child, converted, educated by the very empire that had conquered his homeland, trained in the finest military schools the Ottomans possessed, given a new name in honor of Alexander the Great, handed land, rank, command, and trust. 20 years later, in the middle of a battlefield, he chose his homeland over the empire that had raised him. That single moment, quiet, deliberate, irreversible, would cost the Ottoman Empire 25 years and more men than anyone could count. They built a weapon out of a stolen child, and then they spent the rest of his life trying to destroy what they had made. Drawn from history. He was born George Kastrioti in 1405, the youngest son of an Albanian lord, clinging to territory the Ottomans wanted. His father resisted as long as he could. It wasn't enough. In 1421, defeated and humiliated, George Kastrioti handed his sons over as the price of his own survival. George was 16 when he arrived in Edirne, old enough to remember exactly what he was losing, old enough to understand what was being taken from him. Even as the empire began rebuilding him into something new, they didn't break him through cruelty. That would have been easier to resist. They broke him through excellence, by making him good at something, by rewarding him, by giving a displaced boy a place to belong inside the very system that had displaced him. He converted, he learned, he became by every visible measure exactly what they intended. Skanderbeg, Lord Alexander. For 2 decades he wore that name like it was his own. November 1443. Hunyadi's Hungarian forces were tearing through Ottoman positions, battle after battle, in one of the most successful crusading campaigns the Balkans had seen in a generation. Skanderbeg was there, commanding Albanian troops under the Ottoman banner, watching the empire he had served his entire adult life take losses it hadn't expected. Something in him had been quietly cracking for years. Maybe since his father died, still resisting, still refusing, while his own son fought for the other side. Maybe since the day they renamed him. Maybe there was no single moment at all, just an accumulation of small betrayals of the self, finally reaching a weight he could no longer carry. But on that field, in the middle of that campaign, the moment arrived. He didn't announce it. He didn't deliberate in front of witnesses. He simply turned his horse, gathered 300 Albanian cavalrymen who would follow him into the unknown, and rode away from the only professional life he had ever known. There is no version of this decision that allowed for hesitation. The moment he turned that horse, George Kastrioti, the loyal commander, the trusted Ottoman officer, the man who had spent 20 years becoming someone else's instrument, ceased to exist. What rode toward Albania that night was someone else entirely, a man with nothing certain ahead of him, except the absolute certainty that he could never go back. Desertion was not enough. He needed a fortress, and Kruja, his family's ancestral stronghold, was sealed behind an Ottoman garrison that would never open its gates to a deserter. So he became something the Ottomans had also taught him to be: patient, exact, willing to win through deception when force wouldn't work. He forged a decree, a single sheet of paper bearing a counterfeit seal, claiming the Sultan himself had appointed him governor of the fortress. Imagine the walk to those gates. Every step a gamble, one alert guard, one moment of suspicion, and there would be no second chance. Only an execution for a Christian renegade, pretending to carry the Sultan's authority. The garrison commander held that forged letter in his hands and made a decision that would change the shape of the Balkans for the next quarter century. He believed it. The gates opened. That night, while the garrison slept inside walls they thought were still under their control, Skanderbeg's men emerged from the surrounding woods. Soldiers who had been hiding for hours, waiting in silence for a signal that might never come if the deception had failed even slightly. It hadn't failed. By morning, the Ottoman garrison was gone, and Skanderbeg stood on the walls of Kruja, raising a black double-headed eagle on a field of red. That flag flies over Albania today. Raised for the first time by a man who had taken back his family's fortress using nothing but a lie, and the patience an empire had unknowingly taught him. What followed was not a string of victories. It was 25 years of exhaustion that never fully ended. Every spring brought the possibility of another army. Every harvest carried the risk of famine, because a country constantly at war cannot also feed itself reliably. Every alliance, with Naples, with Venice, with the Pope, came wrapped in conditions, delays, and promises that frequently failed to materialize when the soldiers were actually needed. And the betrayals never stopped. His own nephew Hamza, the same man who had ridden beside him out of the Ottoman army in 1443, who had shared that first irreversible decision, eventually turned, passed over in matters of succession, resentful. Hamza walked back into the arms of the empire his uncle had spent his life resisting. He carried with him every piece of intelligence a man who had fought alongside Skanderbeg for years could possibly offer. Other nobles followed similar paths. Some abandoned the cause outright. Some quietly negotiated with Ottoman agents behind Skanderbeg's back. One nephew sold an entire fortress. This is the part of the story that rarely gets told properly. Skanderbeg wasn't only fighting the largest military power in the known world. He was fighting the slow, grinding erosion of everyone around him, exhaustion among his own people, fear among his own allies, and the particular loneliness of a leader who could never be entirely certain which of his commanders would still be loyal by winter. He kept fighting anyway, not because victory felt close, because stopping wasn't a real option. At Albania in 1457, facing a force 10 times his size, partly led by the same nephew who had once stood beside him, he won through patience and deception once more. Hamza was captured. He would spend the remainder of his life as a prisoner in Naples, a permanent reminder of how close betrayal had come to ending everything. Then came the name that should have ended the story, Mehmed II. This was not an ordinary sultan. This was the man who had just done what no one in 900 years had managed. He had broken the walls of Constantinople and ended the Eastern Roman Empire in a single devastating campaign. He commanded resources, prestige, and a reputation for inevitability that made other rulers surrender before he even arrived. He turned that same machine toward Albania. He sent his best commanders, one after another, including Balaban Pasha, an Albanian himself, taken as a child through the very same imperial system that had once shaped Skanderbeg, now driven by a desperate need to prove his loyalty by destroying his own people. Mehmed eventually came in person, the conqueror of Constantinople standing at the base of a mountain fortress, facing a man with a fraction of his resources and the entire weight of the empire's frustration pressing down on him. The mountains held. They always had. Mehmed withdrew, leaving subordinates to continue what he could not finish quickly. It would not be the last time Constantinople's conqueror left Albania without the victory he had expected. In January 1468, returning once more to confront another Ottoman incursion, Skanderbeg fell ill with fever. He died at 62, not on a battlefield, not at the hands of the empire that had spent 25 years trying to kill him. He simply ran out of time. The resistance he had built around himself, around his personal endurance and his particular genius for survival, did not survive him. Within a decade, Kruja, the fortress he had taken with a forged letter and held against 100,000 men, finally fell. The empire reclaimed everything. Every fortress, every valley, every piece of territory he had spent his life defending. In purely territorial terms, the Ottomans eventually got exactly what they wanted. But land was never really the point. An empire took a frightened 16-year-old boy and spent years turning him into precisely what it needed: loyal, skilled, useful. And the same patience, the same discipline, the same intimate understanding of how that empire thought and moved and fought became the instrument of its own 25-year humiliation. They spent 20 years creating the one man who would spend the next 25 denying them everything they expected in Albania. When he died, the mountains lost their defender. The resistance lost its center of gravity. The territory eventually was lost too. But the man himself, The one thing the empire had spent decades trying to reclaim, to break, to bring back under its control, they never got him back. Not once, in 25 years, did Mehmed or his father before him manage to make George Kastrioti into Skanderbeg again. They raised a son. He chose, at the one irreversible moment that mattered most, to become someone else entirely, and he never went back. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please subscribe and leave a like. You can also write in the comments which historical topics you'd like to see next. See you in the next video.